Welcome to the Leadership Lovers Podcast. I'm your host, Will Gladhart, CMO at the Culture Think Tank. At the Culture Think Tank, we empower leaders with metrics that strengthen culture, drive performance, and return. We're here today to learn about the actions leaders have taken to address organizational change. Today, our guest is Charles Windsor, CEO of Oakwood Systems Group and Talentport, Inc. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us.
Thanks for having me, Will. I appreciate it.
Excellent. Well, let's begin by having you share with our audience a bit about yourself, your background, and the organizations that you run.
A couple things. First, I guess I'm a father and a husband of two girls that are early 30s. I'm even a grandparent. I've got two grandchildren now, surprisingly how that happens when I'm so darn young. I've also been married for 37 years. I've been in the world of consulting. Oh my goodness, probably close to 40 years, believe it or not, coming out of a background of kind of a psychology and then an MBA in finance. I got into sales and eventually landed at what has become Accenture and spent a dozen years there in Ernst & Young before jumping into the entrepreneurial pool, as it were, and starting a business in 1999, which it was a consulting business that I built and sold over a period of 3 years and bought Oakwood in 2003. And then as a part of that, opportunity to start Talentport occurred probably 3 or 4 years later as almost a compliment. We can dig in if it's of merit, the difference between Oakwood, which is more of what we characterize as a consulting managed services business, versus Talentport, which is a staffing company. Anyway, high level about those two companies.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it's interesting that you started another company out of need that grew out of your own business that was a complementary service. Why not go double all in on the entrepreneurial bent? And thanks for sharing that about your journey. In our conversations, would you share why you believe a healthy culture is critical?
I think that culture is certainly important in anything we do, whether it be in a big company, small company. The term culture itself, I think, has probably been used quite a bit. It certainly is the glue that I believe in companies tends to give people a sense of being a part of something other than just a job and a paycheck. I think it's this notion of culture ultimately within the work life has also been kind of a challenge with culture in your home life. So there's some things that are kind of interesting there. I think the third thing I would say is culture. What is healthy? What is a healthy culture? Right. And I think it is, as we'll talk today, we can explore the notion of culture kind of as it exists today versus as you could look back through the decades and say, what's the culture of a company in the 50s versus the culture of a company in 2025? Quite different. I think you might agree.
Absolutely.
So I would say kind of just in terms of our world, a healthy culture and the importance of it. Companies really that are, I believe, successful tend to have open communication, right? Collaboration and teamwork. There's a sense of continuous learning and development. There's a sense of work-life balance. There's a feeling that your views are important. You could use, I don't know, the DEI is even a term we can use anymore. It seems to now have different connotations, but it's certainly critical. Diversity and inclusion and understanding of people's views is incredibly important. Recognition and reward, right? Mm-hmm. Some level of ethical, and companies need to have folks that are ethically and honest and show a sense of integrity. And I would say just maybe even this notion of the ability to have a company that can innovate and adapt. To the world today. Look at what's going on in the world today. My goodness, I bet you almost every company out there is trying to say, okay, what do we do now, right? You can't just stay as a status quo. I think culture, without kind of glamorizing it anymore, is incredibly important in many businesses and certainly ours.
Yeah, well, I love that you touch on culture tying to not only the bottom line of the organization, but also the purpose of employees and staff, and then how it ties to innovation, because those are three key areas that we often find that there are lags or there are gaps in how the organization is operating or how the leader is communicating. So with that in mind, let's begin with our first question. It's been our experience that leaders tend to struggle in three key areas: people, process, or profit. In your role as a leader and a CEO, could you identify an area that represented a cultural challenge or just a challenge in general within your organizations?
And I thought about this question. It's an interesting one. And I would say interesting specifically because we drive our business with our people. This isn't a company that sells a product. We didn't come up with a product. When you have a people driven business that generates revenue via the people, and people, I believe, are directly impacted by the culture of the organization that you're trying to generate or build, as it were. The notion of happy people and happy customers yields a happy company, right? And happy profit.
Right.
I would say of all of those, I don't know that your culture, I think, is a byproduct of the business you have, but you can be very intentional about trying to build your culture, in my mind. And by the way, I'm not such a historian that I could frame out examples where companies have had to pivot their culture. But I certainly think that in our world, in the world of technology, which is the core of what we do, we build and implement technology software for primarily Microsoft centric solutions, but certainly we touch on a lot of other technologies. That industry is changing incredibly quickly. If you were talking to a CEO of a manufacturing business or a CEO of a retailer, those businesses are changing as well, but in different ways. I think that the challenge that we have tried to address in terms of our team and the culture of those people in our business recognize that we need to produce a profit. And by the way, they have a real direct link because in our business, people bill by the hour or they bill by a project or they bill under some guise. And they know that if they do certain things, that produces revenues for the business and ideally, if well run, a profit.
Right.
So they have an understanding of the notion of profit. They also understand that our business processes need to be followed. There's a variety of reasons why I won't unpack those for you in terms of that we really sell a process for delivering a result, if you think about it in some sense. The challenge that we have culturally is to make sure that the people that we hire fit our culture and the culture that we have fits our people.
Right.
And so in that in that context, part of what I've tried to do is we simply say, well, what is our culture? And again, you could argue that companies put posters up on the walls and of sunsets and whatnot. We try to refine and define our culture in kind of the values that we espouse as an organization. And again, we try to embrace those on a somewhat consistent basis. But I'll share what those values are with you literally just for your audience.
That would be fantastic.
We encourage responsible risk-taking to find bold solutions and foster personal and professional growth. Hard work is our foundation and humor is our mortar.
I like that.
We actively seek opportunities to help our clients, our team, and ourselves through knowledge sharing, volunteering, and community events. We believe helping others is a participatory sport. We are inspired to be pushed outside of our comfort zone and are eager to thank those for inspiring us to take a risk. And we encourage everyone to lead through their attitude and approach. And attitude for me personally is, I think, oftentimes I tend to be the last interview. I interview everybody that we bring on board and some that we don't that may not be a fit. But I'm tending to interview more for their attitude than their aptitude. I have a lot of folks that evaluate their aptitude under a number of different components. And while our business is incredibly rigorous in many things that we look for, whether they're analytical skills or certain technical skills or problem solving or critical thinking, whatever, I think if you bring somebody with the right attitude and they have some elemental level of foundation, you're going to hire good people. So that's really when we are kind of evaluating those folks, we're trying to evaluate them around an attitude and aptitude, but then more importantly, fit. Do they fit within the culture of what we're trying to build here?
Right. No, I think that's a really interesting point that you've brought up in terms of you kind of covered our other questions in your thoughts about the discussion about what the challenge was, especially around people. And then the thing that you identified was really the values that you've laid out for the organization, that the person's fit has to be tied to the values and to the other people in the organization. I love hearing about that connectivity because we've shown statistically that the more connected employees are in an organization, the more they understand their role, the better they feel, the higher they perform, the better revenue gets generated, up to 15 to 20, 30+% gains over 12 to 14 months. There is some secret sauce to It's not a secret sauce, but there is something to what exactly you were putting in place and what you have kind of steered your company towards. As we kind of wrap up our conversation today, is there anything else you'd like to share with fellow leaders?
I'll unpack it a little bit more for you because I think the interesting dichotomy of culture today with culture of yesterday and the culture challenge in our world is that we hire people who don't work in two of our physical geographies.
Right.
So we have quite a few people that are remote workers. And I would dare to be so bold as to say, I think the challenge that we're seeing with the remote worker movement that occurred during the pandemic and is now companies are pulling workers back into the office. We've always had this in the services business, certainly when I worked in the bigger companies and neither even when I've been on my own, and we were just chatting about earlier, is that when you have a remote worker, it's more challenging than ever to make sure that you're hiring those folks for the kinds of things that they're going to bring to the table, other than whether you're going to bill for them. Remote workers, we have a set of criteria and evaluation criteria and questions that we use because remote workers, while they have many of the things you might look for in the job description, to be successful, there's certain characteristics you have to evaluate about who can be a successful remote worker. Because as anybody that's worked remotely, there's complications there. There's no separation with work-life balance, right? There's oftentimes distractions.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got situations where if you're sitting in a cubicle or you're sitting in an office, you don't have those. And so the dilemma that we have is not only the ability to be productive in that remote setting, but from a cultural contribution, you have to be much more intentional with remote workers of engaging them to be a part of your culture, to engage them, to put, as I like to call it, 2 feet into the business versus 1 foot.
Right.
And when you think about the notion of remote workers and you think about the portability of jobs today, and I mean, there's nothing more portable than IT skilled folks.
Right.
There's a tremendous demand for them. And there's this industry, not only on the staffing side that I mentioned about another business, but in general, where companies via LinkedIn can be recruiting people, and those employees whose images are out on, say, LinkedIn, can be recruited. And so the ability to find folks that fit your culture, that you can bring into the business, that aren't working in your physical offices, you can make sure they're engaged appropriately. You can make sure that they're feeling that sense of recognition, reward, a challenge in a business where maybe you're not walking down the hall and you can give them an attaboy or an girl kind of thing, right? It's complications like that that undermine a leader's ability to foster culture, much less the portability problem. I think I saw a statistic, and this was maybe for the, not the millennials, maybe it was the millennials, it could even be Gen Z. There was a statistic that said the average millennial is going to have 15 jobs in their career. And if you think about the average career, mid 60s, 40 some odd years, that's a job every 2 to 3 years.
Right.
When you think about a leader, how do I build a culture? Culture comes through consistency, engaged employees, the ability maybe to be in touch with them. Thank goodness for video, right?
Right.
It certainly helps bridge the gap. And then you combine that with this notion of skills portability and the gig work environment and folks being able to move jobs easily. I think it creates a tremendous challenge. And you've got to find a way. And by the way, it's one of the biggest things we found in that kind of evaluation of do you put 2 feet in versus 1,
Mm-hmm.
is those remote workers that are really good at remote work, they put 2 feet in because they believe that it's their, I wouldn't say responsibility, they enjoy reaching out
Mm-hmm.
as much as you enjoy engaging them, whether you're the manager or you're another member of the team. They make a point of engaging with the rest of the organization on a proactive basis.
Right.
And it's that combination of making sure you got the right folks on the bus, as Jim Collins liked to say, and in the right seats. And by you make sure those seats fit your business model. It's a complicated stew.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you bringing up that you approach 2 different pathways for hiring individuals, both in person and remote work. And there's a different set of criteria. I think you're one of our first guests and leaders that has actually brought that up. Many have remote workers or they have a partial remote workforce, but no one's really addressed those key points. And I think it's absolutely imperative that leaders understand that I mean, it is a difference, and it is a different type of person that are in different roles. So again, going back to the communication, values, finding the right fit at the organization. So thank you so much for sharing that. Anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up today?
You touched on the last thing I was going to mention. And truly, when you said, what is the one thing that impacted your culture positively?
Hmm.
Communication, communication, communication,
Yep.
right? If you look at the importance of that level of communication, right, whether it's downwards, sideways, upwards, the ability to be able to hear and see from folks. And again, it's a never ending improvement story, right?
Hmm.
I think if we were to do surveys every year, more communication. And again, it's got to be the right stuff. Employees don't want exhaustive communication that, oh my gosh, another email, another CEO missive, Charles, pontificating from on high. They want stuff that's going to be relevant to them, and they don't necessarily always want to hear it from me. And by
Right.
the way, as a leader, I think that, gosh, who is I that I read about? Jensen Wang at NVIDIA has such a flat organization that he has, I think, something like 30,000 people that can email him about anything, everything and anything. Now,
Yeah.
granted, that can produce a little lack of focus, but the fact of the matter is you as a leader have got to be willing to take the pulse of the organization, not just through HR or just through your direct reports, but how do you talk to the folks maybe that are 2, 3 levels down or more? How do you find a way to ensure that you're listening to that drumbeat of the organization so that when it comes to the culture, either you're able to get ahead of it. More importantly, many leaders can't be all things to all people, but that your people and the folks that are in touch with that part of the organization can make sure they surface those things and address them on a proactive basis. So that would be my final thought.
And I,
It's the communication, stupid, kind of,
right. It's
that's
communication.
not a good acronym.
But no, I love that because a very wise mentor said to me many years ago, he goes, when I was in operations, manufacturing, warehouse, logistics, etc., he said, don't sit in the office, go walk the floor, know your people, know what they can do, know what their capabilities are. And when you do that and you can do every job that they do, your things will run very smoothly and you will have buy-in from your staff and they will make you look great.
Hence, beautiful advice. In the
Yeah.
world of today, how can you walk the floor digitally? How
Yeah.
can you walk the floor if they're not there? How can you go down the
Yeah.
hall, have a cup of
Yeah.
coffee, or
Knock on the
grab a bite
door.
to eat with somebody? Again, that's the dilemma of big companies and small companies. Anyway,
Yeah. Well, Charles, I've enjoyed having you on our Leadership Lovers
oh,
podcast. Thank you
thank
for
you.
your thoughts and your time.
You bet. Will. Take care. Thanks so much.
Thank you for joining us on the Leadership Lovers podcast. Find all our Leadership Lovers episodes on the Culture Think Tank website at www.theculturethinktank.com or listen on your favorite streaming platform. We'd love to hear from you about the challenges you have faced as a leader. Tune in weekly as we invite leaders to share their experiences in strengthening culture and performance, one action at a time.